Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Camp Conversations. Today, I am so excited to welcome Simón Silva to speak with us on the podcast. Our focus on resilience is going to be so clear in this conversation. I met Simón through LinkedIn. He is a creative crusader, and as soon as I saw that title, I had to know more. And our first conversation that we had together really showed me that the mission that he's on to help bring art into the education system aligns so quickly or so well with the mission of camp, which is to find ways to help support educators, parents, frontline staff build their resilience so they can better support future generations and continue doing the work that they are so inspired by. Our conversation today is going to focus on that intersection of art and resilience. And I'm going to get Simón to start by just answering who he is and to give us a little bit more detail on his background. So thanks again for coming on our podcast today.
You're welcome, Dana. Thanks for having me. So just a little bit about who I am. My name is Simón Silva, and I was born in Mexico, but I only stayed there for a year and a half. So my parents brought me over to the U.S. When I was probably a year and a half. I was, like I said, I was only born there. I was the last one of a total of 11 kids in our family. This is what I looked like back then. I was actually really good looking and I got old. I came here when I was a year and a half, and we settled in the what is considered to be basically an agricultural desert. It's the southernmost part of the southern eastern part of California, which is east of San Diego. Not much there. They diverted the Colorado River to this area, so it's basically an agriculture area. For the most part, during the summertime, it's basically kind of dead. I mean, there's really not much going on there because it can get up to 115, 120 degrees in the summertime. I grew up in the east side, the west side of town, which is the poor town. This is what my house looked like. There was 11 of us, and we did whatever it took to survive. This is one of the pieces I did in one of my um, insightfulness of looking back in my life. We slept in the living room. There was 13 people basically in a two-bedroom house. So we had a small air conditioner, small heater. So there wasn't a lot of room. Also grew up in a household where my dad was an alcoholic, so there was a lot of domestic violence. So it wasn't unlikely for me to wake up. It wasn't uncommon for me to wake up at 2:30 in the morning, week after week, year after year, experiencing that. I went to school because I felt safer in school. Now, as far as education is concerned, I think that my friends and I think we all came to a conclusion that we were lesser than or less intelligent simply because we didn't do very well when it came to GPA and those kinds of things. And I think the problem with that thinking was simply, in retrospect, the reason why we didn't do very well was because we lived in environments that weren't conducive to our enhancement in terms of personal growth and learning. So when you're trying to survive emotionally, obviously it's going to be a big challenge. So why would you want to be a great student, GPA wise, right? So that really kind of hindered a lot of stuff, along with the fact that I also grew up with as a migrant student. For those of you who don't know what a migrant student is, basically I grew up traveling up and down the state of California. I was pulled out of school about a month early. We came back about a month and a half late. Up and down the state of California, as far north as Oregon and Washington State. I think we went all the way up to Bellingham, Washington, which is very, very close to the Canadian border. You know, my parents didn't look at education as something that was valid or important. So my parents basically figured that the rest of the family, the rest of the kids, or all the kids were going to, spend the rest of their lives picking in the fields. And so these are some of the photographs of me picking different types of fruits and vegetables. So by the time was in high school, most of my brothers and sisters had been pulled out of school, and the same thing was going to happen to me. Luckily, I had some really good teachers and counselors, and my mom did my dirty work for me. So she convinced my dad to let me go to college, and he was not very happy with it. He got very violent. He saw going to school, and he compared it to heavy work, and there was no comparison, right? Working hard was valid. You know,
Mm.
your nose in the book was not. So taking tests was not. So they had a very, very weird concept. And I think it was partly a lack of abstract thinking skills to kind of understand that education, all that stuff kind of remains in your head.
Mm.
They knew that if you pick 10 boxes of strawberries, for example, you're going to get paid for 10 boxes of strawberries. So there's a physicality to their existence that the lack of abstract thinking did not provide them with that understanding of the importance of education. Uh,
Mhm.
I ended up going to community college for a couple of years simply because I had no idea what I was doing. I decided to major in art again because I had no idea what I was doing. Eventually, I transferred to the world famous Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California. And no, this is not Richard Ramirez, the serial killer. This is Simón Silva 1.0. This is what happens and what you look like when you have no money. It took me 5 years to graduate from this school. I chose the cheapest major, which was illustration. It took me 5 years to graduate. Unfortunately, my parents did not show up to my graduation, and that was pretty painful.
Mm.
Why they didn't show up? I think simply put, they were afraid and they were embarrassed. And I think that as we see what's going on in our country these days, I think you can kind of understand that there still are groups of people that are um, defenseless, that are not considered to be part of the Americana way of life. And so I think
Mhm.
my parents understood that, and they saw that they were probably not going to be welcomed with open arms in some of these places that they needed to go. I looked at myself in the mirror. I knew how to draw and paint really well, but I looked at myself in the mirror, and part of my education or lack of education was simply understanding self. But I think the resilience up to this point came from just understanding that going to school and getting paid to draw and paint was a lot easier than picking fruits and vegetables for 12, 15, 16 hours. And that was something that happened a lot. And that was one of the reasons my father loved going to Washington State, because the sun doesn't set till 10:30 at night during the summertime. So he could literally work us till 5:30, 6:30, 7:30 at night, and we still had 3 hours of beautiful sunlight, which I
Mhm.
absolutely hated. The worst thing for me in looking at myself was the fact that I was deficient still, even with a BA in illustration. I was deficient in a lot of areas. The worst one for me was my lack of communication skills, being able to kind of express myself, but also kind of also understanding that did I really have something to offer above and beyond my abilities to draw and paint? This is where the literature component and being introduced to books in general and being able to identify with these characters in these books also provided with an abundance of resilience, right? Because we do stuff because we accept the fact and we expect success. If you already, I come across a lot of people who, if I ask them to draw or paint something, they already kind of failed because they expect to fail. And
Mm.
so they've kind of built up this resilience and lack of confidence. The resilience part of it is lacking simply because they didn't kind of pounded in their heads that everything has to be looking realistic, or they just their past is still very much present in their present time. So for me, the literature and the books and being able to kind of give me some more resilience in the fact that my crazy life and my existence in the first 26 years of my life had happened before to other people, and kind of
Mm.
understanding that really kind of gave me the resilience, but also the understanding that I was not going to be 12 or 15 or 18 years old for the rest of my life. That also kind of helped me move forward because I knew that I was going to have a time and opportunities for myself to be able to pick and choose the path that I wanted to take. So
Mm.
the literature, especially the Chicano literature or the Hispanic Latino literature, with the characters that were very similar to mine, that definitely helped tremendously.
Yeah, and I
And
mean, we talk a lot about how one of the key components of resilience is connection, and I hear that you found that if you felt like you were lacking in communication, and I'm assuming you meant verbal communication, you found that connection in different ways. and having that helped shape some of your views to keep going.
Absolutely. Also being able to have the vocabulary, right?
Mhm.
To be able to express yourself and find the right words to connect to those feelings or just feelings or ideas and concepts that you felt that you needed to kind of get out.
Yeah, and I think you also made another really great point back there when you were talking about so many people go in expecting to fail, and sometimes that has more to do with this what we're told success looks like.
Mhm.
And I hear that as a running theme as you just explained your young life history there is that success wasn't painted as an image that you were included in. And it sounds like that was true for your parents as well.
Yeah, I think when you come from nothing, from very little, um, the only direction is either further down or up, and any
Mm,
any upward movement is success.
okay.
Right? So if you're already at the bottom and you get to 1% success, I mean, that's success. And you take it for whatever it is, right? So I think that was also the other component was that my parents never expected anything from me. So I think
Mm,
that was a sigh of relief. One of the things that my wife and I talk about, both, we both have a degree, and we kind of shudder at the idea that there's still parents that are hovering over their children and expecting them to be a doctor or to be this or to be that. And we've never told our kids, that they needed to be something or to have a GPA of this caliber. We never expected any of that stuff.
mm,
The only thing that we expected was for them not to get an F or a D in the
mhm.
grades. And then my oldest son ended up failing PE, and that was a big disappointment, right? But I think he recovered. He ended up going back and he recovered that grade. So that was a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so almost not having a certain bar laid out for you was a little bit of a relief.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I mean, nothing is expected of you. So any kind of success is going to be success, period. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. And the thing is that even going to school, I didn't know what I was doing because I really didn't know what to expect because I heard about a BA or an AA BA. I got the AA. I didn't know what exactly the BA master's or PhD was about, right? But also coming back home after taking life drawing classes, with nude people coming back to the house, my father would see these drawings and he thought I was doing pornography
mm.
because they didn't understand the whole artistic process. So I could never win in that circumstance.
And what, because it almost sounds like going into art was dangerous for you. I mean, you said that going to school, your father acted out violently. And then
Mhm.
once you attended school, it sounds like you still went back home. What kept you in art?
I sort of felt that that was the thing that was going to give me the greatest degree of success because I knew I could draw and paint realistically, and that's what I thought art was about, right? I thought art was about copying and creating things that were pretty and realistic. And
Mm.
so I knew I could do that, so I figured that I was already halfway there in some regard.
Okay. And how has that changed with your life experience and I guess what you see and how you look at art now?
Oh, it's 360 degrees differently. We'll talk a little bit about that as I kind of go through these slides and talk a little bit more about how do we regain what we lost, right? And what the objective of this whole thing as a creativity crusader is all about. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Tell us about Creativity Crusaders.
Yeah. So I am a creative person. So I write, I paint, I speak. I'm still trying to figure out what other things I can do really well. But this is some of the work that I've done recently. A couple of years ago, I ended up doing almost 60 paintings in 1 year, which is a lot. I'm not in that pace this year, but I am doing some other things. So I decided to kind of a little bit go back to creating some of the experiences and some of the people that I encountered during my days in the work in the fields. But I
Mhm.
wanted to make sure that it modernized a lot of those experiences, a lot of these images. So these are crates of boxes. Those aren't. those are not painted. Those are actually part of the spaces in between the wood boxes.
Wow.
And then I painted some of the places that we used to stay at, which are basically like chicken coops, right? So it's either staying in the fields, staying in the car, or staying in these chicken coops that were horrible.
Mm.
It's interesting because you called it home simply because you had no other options. So I did a series of those, did a series of these hedge trimmers, and again, kind of modernizing some of the stuff that I now encounter more than the working in the fields, which is people that cut yards and do this kind of labor like hedge trimmers. And then encounter a lot of women now that work in hotels. Um that my wife and I encounter. And that was kind of an interesting series. I don't want to get too much into it because we got a lot to cover, but
Mm.
I also started this series with field workers with UFOs. So I call these UFOs with uh, UFWs, uh, unidentified farm workers with unidentified flying
Mhm.
objects. But the idea here was that a lot of these people that come here to work, a lot of these individuals come here and they don't have time for this kind of conspiracy theories and crazy nutty stuff, right? Even
Mhm.
if a spaceship were to, hover above them, all they want to do is make some money so they can improve their situation and their family situation. So that's what this was about. But I'm a big fan of Jordan Peele's work. So, I like the whole concept of being able to kind of integrate stuff that I grew up with, the sci-fi comic book stuff. So that's one of the things that I'm kind of exploring as well. Plus also, I'm a big fan of Edward Hopper's work, along with a lot of other people's work. But there is this kind of Edward Hopperish kind of look to this stuff, this kind of
Mhm.
minimal, secluded kind of lifestyle of a lot of these individuals. I also did a series called The Lost Cat or the Gato Perdido series. Somebody in Pasadena here was actually offering $1,000 for a lost cat, and growing up with a street dog that nobody took care of, that we never took to the vet, I live in the duality of the past and the present, right? Of
Mhm.
the fact that I live in this kind of middle class mentality now. But the past is still very much present because it dictates the balance of how I perceive things. Because
Mhm.
it's easy for me as a middle class mentality to kind of accept and also agree with a lot of the middle class mentality when in fact everybody lives in different environments and different situations that are not necessarily our reality. And
Mhm.
so I ended up putting the phone number of JD Vance's phone number, office phone number in Ohio.
Mhm.
During the art show that I had these at, people were actually calling JD Vance's office. So that was that. But there's some other stuff. I also did some still lifes, and these I actually did way before what's happening here in LA. And it was interesting because I wanted to do a different type of still life, but I grew up with these green little army soldiers that I grew up with that I found, and maybe this was kind of a premonition of the martial law that we have here in LA. I mean, because that's really what we have, which is kind of sad, right?
Mhm.
And I also did a series of TV dinners, stuff that I wanted when I was a kid because I couldn't afford it, and they looked really delicious on TV. But then obviously I had them, and then I realized that they're just crap. They're garbage.
Mhm.
They're not good. Um, I don't know if you have any thoughts on or any questions about that before I move forward.
I mean, you make pretty strong statements through your art. And I guess when I'm looking at it from that resilience standpoint, does it feel vulnerable? And do you feel like you have to tap into a lot of bravery to do that? I mean, especially in today's world.
I think one of the things that can, in fact, add to the resilience of a person is to not hide things, right? Because
Mhm.
I think that the more you hide things and the less truthful you are with self and feelings, it's going to hold you back. And so when you ask if it's painful or if it's difficult to do that, because at 64, I've learned that life is basically just a series of habits and
Mhm.
try to exchange the bad habits for the good habits. Um, I don't think I'm any more intelligent than anybody else. I think that what I like what Albert Einstein said. He said that, he doesn't have any special abilities, but he's just passionately curious about everything. And I think that when we look at kids, right, when we look at young kids, we see the fact that they would, partly part ignorance, but also a big, huge swath of curiosity. They
Mhm.
put their hand in a boiling pot or a flame or a pit of vipers, partly out of ignorance, but a big part of that is actually curiosity, right?
Mhm.
So I think that my wife being a teacher and knowing CPR, which I need to kind of take a class in, we all kind of look to her. But I noticed that my new philosophy is that fear and creativity cannot coexist in the brain at the same time.
Mhm.
In doing so, when we search those moments of beauty, because there's so much beautiful, interesting stuff out there, but there's also huge piles of garbage that pile up on that stuff. And this is why also it's important for us to create a network in the times that we're living in, because
Mhm.
who has the time, right?
Mhm.
So being able to kind of speak to people that we trust in terms of shows, movies, books, conversations, questions about spirituality, about culture, about art, creativity, painting, about music. I get inspiration from all that stuff. And so I think that because I've had a taste of it and I've made it a habit to
Mhm.
seek more and more and more of it. This is why at 64, I guess, people within my circles or even my own family, they find it odd that, that I like listening to OG, rap music,
Mhm.
and that I listen to country music and that I listen to pretty much everything, right?
Mhm.
So they find that to be strange because people who don't seek out the best of everything find it odd when they live in this kind of segmented, isolated world.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think you just touched on 2 points that our listeners can take away right away to help draw that resilience from everything that you're saying. And one is, if I could go back to the start of our conversation where you said there's a little bit of freedom in not having a specific bar or image set for yourself. And then I
Mhm.
heard you here now say, and there's this freedom in going into things curiously.
Mhm.
And so many of us jump into things thinking that it's going to be a certain way, whether that's how we're going to produce a piece of art or how we are going to be in a certain profession or a certain role. And if we can just take a step back from that, instead of creating that image in our heads, jump into it with that curious mindset. And I feel like that is what you do so well when you're advocating and going on this crusader mission of bringing education to or bringing art into younger and younger age cohorts because it
Mhm.
gives them that skill set for life, and it seems to be something that is just so needed in this day and age.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I write in my new book that I'm currently trying to finish is, art, the subject of change, how to enhance the full human potential, right? Because I don't think we're even close to that. I think that most people probably are at, the 15-25% mark.
Mhm.
I think people have failed to really kind of understand all of their potential. And so one of the things that I find to be really interesting is that we need to start everything that we do with number one, understanding that everything that we say that we do can be improved.
Mhm.
If we start off from that, plus we also need to start off by asking ourselves the question, what is my objective in doing this? Because I have this feeling that because of this kind of Western education system that we currently have, if you attempt to do anything, whether it's dance, music, art, cooking, whatever it may be, that if you're going to invest a certain amount of time in learning that, that you almost are expected to kind of make money off of it because money becomes the objective, right?
Mhm.
So the objective needs to be turned around and say, it has to do with my personal growth and happiness.
Mhm.
That needs to be the objective. Because once we turn it into something else, then if we fail, again, we don't have hope, and then that's where the lack of resilience ends up creeping in over and over and over again.
Mhm. Mhm. I mean, that was a practice in my house growing up. was when we collected for family dinners. It was, instead of saying what we were going towards, it was celebrating something that we failed at.
Mm.
The chair. We usually called it wipeout of the day. You talk about something that you failed at, just to learn that,
Yeah.
yeah, we're always growing, and that's the goal, is not to be the best.
Yeah. And I also feel that, you know, we enter an education system that becomes a competition, and education and learning should never, never have been a competition. But I
Mhm.
still come across a lot of parents who try to impress me with the fact that their kids went to USC or Harvard or Yale or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And that's great. I mean, more power to them. Or that they have their kids in an art program. And my response to that is, well, I mean, are they lifelong learners, right? I mean, that really, to me, is more of the objective. I don't care where you went to school. If you went to Harvard and yet you no longer read books or ask questions or, growing personally, then, what's the point, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's important for us to kind of refine the magic that we all had in the process of learning as kids, because learning was magical.
Mhm.
And I still find learning things and finding things out and asking questions to be, I still want the magic. I still want the learning component,
Yeah.
quite active. And I think that's also the part of the resilience part of it, right? Um, that a kid is, or a person, anybody, a human being, because we're all intelligent. And this is one of the reasons why I don't use the word stupid or dumb anymore.
Mhm.
I think people get complacent and they get lazy. And I think that the current state of humanity right now is that we're addicted to being entertained and distracted, and those two things are not conducive to the right environment for personal growth. It's
Yes, and I think also, if I were to reflect on my own professional role as a counselor, some of the biggest intakes that we have are when people retire, and sometimes that tells me that we, as a society, identify so strongly with one specific role and one specific way of learning and doing things, that when that role is over, like you said, we don't have maybe the passion, maybe no longer the skill set to continue learning, to continue curiously exploring. And as you said, that then we don't have the resilience.
Yeah, and on that note, this is where in order for us to have a complete, accurate conversation or understanding of what we're talking about here in terms of the resilience, is that I believe that we have to go back to the beginning. And what I mean in the beginning is the beginning, right? Pre-school, before we enter the education system, because I believe that during the formative years of our lives, certain aspects of our uniqueness, our individuality, our creativity, our curiosity were gradually eroded. And I hate to say this, but I think a lot of this erosion came from being in the classroom with very sincere, amazing people. I mean, I love my teachers when I was in first, second, third, well, not third grade. Well, actually, not second grade. Third grade was great. But I think that a lot of teachers, unfortunately, it's not their fault, but most teachers have no idea or very little idea what they're doing with art and the application and the way we can use the arts to enhance what's already organically there. We enter an education system, at least I know for sure here in the US. I don't know if in Canada, but it becomes a competition. And I would say it's probably the same pretty much everywhere around the world.
Yeah.
It becomes a competition. Who's going to get the highest grade? Who's going to be the teacher's pet? I think that we enter school with a full tank of curiosity, but I think that eventually that tank of curiosity runs dry simply because the magic begins to deteriorate. And the perception that we have about the arts, both at the elementary school level and even the college and university level, is that it's simply an elective.
Mhm.
It has no place in the core subjects that we teach in the education system because we don't know what to do with it.
Mhm. Which is ironic because, I mean, one of the main forms of therapy that we bring adults into is art therapy.
Yeah.
It's a starting place.
Yeah. And I think we're also stuck with the definition or the understanding of what intelligence is. I used to believe, like a lot of people, a lot of parents, that intelligence was about the GPA, right?
Mhm.
All those friends that I went to school with, because they were straight A students, they were a million times smarter than I was, right?
Mhm.
Or the test taking and whatever, or answering questions. And obviously, that's not my philosophy anymore or a definition of intelligence. To me, intelligence is about collecting information that, as human beings, we do beautifully because we're intelligent creatures. The processing of that information, right? Thinking deeply because we all know that scientists don't know how long it takes from short-term memory to go to long-term memory, and also the application of that information, applying that information in a way that only you or I can and nobody else can.
Mhm.
Because even though we all live in the same space and time, we all have a different nuance as to how we experience this life and the reality that we live in. The problem is, I think that we've gotten to the point where we're stuck in step two. And step two, in terms of processing the information, like I said earlier, if we're addicted to being entertained and distracted, um, and God forbid we spend 8 hours on TikTok or Instagram because there's a lot of depressing stuff on there. So we
Mhm.
definitely use it effectively. The algorithms can definitely spit out or provide us the stuff that we're into, but we got to be very strategic about it in the times that we're living in. Now,
Mhm.
I wanted to share with you, I don't know how many of your audience know about this, but in 1965, there was a gentleman by the name of George Land, um, and he was hired by NASA to produce a creativity test that NASA wanted to use to gauge the creativity of the possible employees, because they wanted to hire the most intelligent, but also the most creative. So George Land came up with this creativity test that he gave to NASA, and of course, NASA became NASA. Him being a very creative individual, he wanted to see what would happen if he gave the same test to a group of 1,600 kids between the ages of 3 and 5. And the results were the fact that they scored at 98% creative geniuses.
Wow.
Now, he continued to track these kids up to the age of 30 plus years. And by the time they were 30 plus years, they were down to just 2% creative genius in their score in the test. My question, if I had a chance to talk to George Land, would have been, when did we get into the negative, right? Was it
Yeah.
40? Was it a 50? Was it a 60 that we became minus 80 or minus 50? I mean, that's where my creativity and questioning goes to place. Now,
Mhm.
why is this important? Well, I have to ask the question because I'm a curious person. What would happen if we were to protect and enhance even 50% of everyone's creativity and individuality and curiosity? I think that we would see this enormous advantage uh, in our all of our society in terms of people being able to apply information that they collect in such a unique fashion that it definitely would enhance uh, who we would become as a society.
Mhm.
Even if we were to just protect 50% of that, because I think that that's really what is in blocking our humanity's advancement is that. And when George Land or when I talk about uh, genius, right?
Mhm.
These are some examples that I wanted to share with you and the audience. This is Rocco, one of my friend's son at age 5. He did a portrait of his father. It looks exactly like his dad, the one on the left. Uh, he has like 12 hairs left, but I think now he has like 6 hairs left. And then he did a heart, right? He did a heart with 5 hearts inside of it. I mean, that just kind of blows my mind, right? Of just the curiosity and creativity. And again, the communication level, right? This
Mhm.
is something my son Emilio did at age 4. We all know who it is. But oftentimes, like doctors, a lot of people come to me and say, well, what's the big deal about these drawings that these children create? I think one of the biggest discriminations that has existed and continues to exist is against our own children, right?
Mhm.
Once we start using the word child, it kind of demeans the intelligence and the expertise and the genius that is already there in the child organically.
Mhm.
We don't want to believe it. We find it difficult to accept that the child is definitely a genius communicator visually and
Mhm.
maybe even verbally as well.
Mhm.
But they asked me, well, what's the big deal? And I said, well, you know what the big deal is? I can guarantee you that in the past, present, and future, you will never, ever see another drawing exactly like this.
Mm,
In the same way that it relates to the fact that in the past, present, and future, you will never encounter another person like Dayna or Simón Silva or Emilio. Never.
mhm,
So we need to get this in the right context. This is the genius part of it. And I think that we lose track because of life, because of confusion. But then as teachers, I don't know if in Canada, but I know for a fact that here in the US, because a lot of teachers haven't had the right training and understanding of how to use the arts effectively to enhance what's already organically there,
mhm,
they are now doing this thing called direct or directed drawing. This is
mhm,
something my wife gave me, and this is a preschool pre-kinder teacher who was trying to show her students how to draw George Washington. Well, my wife gave me the drawing of the one on the right. And when I first saw it, I thought it was a drawing about a kid who got into a fight. And as you can tell, it's a brilliant, brilliant image. Um, when I wanted to meet this kid, of course, the parents were kind of freaked out. Why is this, grown man trying to meet my kid, right?
yeah.
And so they didn't want me to meet the kid. But a couple of years later, my wife still saw the teacher at one of the schools that she substitutes at and told her that I was still using this image that this pre-kinder kid did. And her response that was that she rolled her eyes. She
Mm,
rolled her eyes because again, it's not the teacher's fault. If you don't have all the pieces of the puzzle and a complete understanding of how this stuff works to enhance what's already organically there, then everybody's going to make the mistake of eroding that, of
mhm,
negatively affecting that, unfortunately. And then, we had the Meet the Masters that came out about 2 or 3 decades ago. And of course, if you can imagine yourself, this is one of my other sons drawing Francisco at age 6, and of course it's the Tin Man.
mhm,
But if you can imagine yourself as a pre-kinder, kinder student, first grade student, and you're doing these amazing, unique drawings, but then the teacher comes in and says, I really don't care what you're doing, or the parent comes in and says, yeah, it's cute, but you really should be studying Vincent van Gogh or Cezanne or Picasso or anybody else.
mhm,
That's where the biggest mistake happens, right? So you're kind of like sending a message to the child that whatever they're capable of doing, which is absolutely genius, doesn't really matter.
mhm.
There's plenty of time for them to meet the masters, as they get older, to kind of solidify what's going on. And of course, a lot of teachers now, my wife has experienced this and brought this to me where a lot of teachers basically just give her coloring pages. And what I tell my wife is, look, put a video of a beaver or a bird or a tree or what a dog, whatever it may be, and
Mhm.
then just have them draw it. And so in this case, my wife was asking me about this drawing thing that the teacher wanted her to do with the kids. And I said, nah, throw that away, burn it. And she ended up showing them the sea life. And this is one of the drawings that one of the kids did. I think it was a first, second grader, I think. And as you can tell, it's a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned, right?
Can I want to draw one big connection that I'm hearing through all of this, for our listeners to take away right away that
Mhm.
might still be listening to you and being like, well, why? Why is it a masterpiece? Why do I care? Why don't I want my kids just to learn the skill set of drawing within the lines? And if we go back to where you said curiosity is resilience, because instead of having this predetermined outcome, we can keep going because we're always wondering more and more and more and what's next. And if you look at kids' art, I mean, I was taught, um, from that mental health perspective of when I look at a child's art, I can see in that art what is of value to them, what is important. Like that picture you showed, of your friend's son that drew the heart with the hearts within the heart. And
Mhm.
oh, wow, that's a kid that has had lots of love in his life, and it just is radiating from him. And this is so important to have that within his life. And when I think of my own kids, sometimes they have their artwork and they go out and they sit in nature and they try and draw a flower. And when they're drawing that flower, they go, "Hey, Mom, have you noticed that there's this little line on the petal? I wonder what that line's for. And I wonder why the leaves are shaped this way. Or I wonder what chewed on the stem in this spot." And that art of doing things your own way and looking through your own lens and fostering that within children fosters that curiosity, which then fosters that resiliency, which continues on. And I love how you're really painting that for us.
So the way I would answer that, why, right? Why is
Mhm.
this genius? Why is, let me move forward with that because I think that, for example, I think this would be a good example to answer that professionally.
Mhm.
We all know and we've heard about, well, if you know something about art, you're going to know that there's a thing called principles of design. Now, principles of design is basically a list of things that will provide you with an understanding to create something that is going to be much more successful. Okay. And I love that word because I absolutely hate the word better,
Mm.
because I think that gets you into trouble and it creates fear. I mean, because what exactly is better? But in successful, you're still being successful, right? Um, so anything a child does, anything anybody does is a success. The fact that we're able to draw something and create something that is going to show you the way they view the world,
Mm.
is it, and to create something from nothing is already successful, right? But even as a trained artist, using the principles of design, my wife gave me this drawing that this little girl made, and as you can tell, it's a beautiful elephant.
Mhm.
And when I saw this, I thought, wow, it kind of looks like a flea. But then my wife said, no, it's an elephant. A lot of people would say, well, what happened to the other legs? And if you were to ask this child what happened to the other legs, she would say, oh, you silly. They're behind these two legs.
Yeah.
Logical, right? But the
Mhm.
thing that really caught my attention, and the reason why I show this and talk about this, is that art can provide us with ways of looking at things that we've forgotten. And you're right. A child is going to find, kind of like my puppy, right? They're going to find stuff. I mean, and how did they get into this? How did they find this? And so when I saw this drawing of this elephant, basically sucking up the water through the trunk, I had forgotten that, we as human beings, as adults, experience the world through the superficiality of things, right? I mean, I'm seeing you on video and I see your glasses, I see your face, and if by default, I think most artists were, if they were drawing you, they would draw the exterior, right?
Mhm.
But I know for a fact that you have a skull, that you have a heart, that you have lungs, you have, all of these internal organs, and you have the ribs. And so I did a series of images of paintings, where I actually stole this idea, well, borrowed this idea from this little girl. And I did a painting of Mr. Rogers where I show his heart, kind of like the Grinch when it grew 10 times bigger.
Mhm.
And so I gave myself the permission through borrowing this idea that I've forgotten, that I have every right to be able to draw any part of the internal organism of the dog or the flower or the person, or even the inside of a room. I know if there's another room beyond this, or if there's a river behind this, I can bring any of that stuff into this space. And so there's aspects of looking and looking at the success of these children's drawings because they speak to stuff that we've forgotten or that we're not clearly seeing the way that we should. Um, I can't remember the name of the book, but it talks about the fact that as before we learned how to speak with words, everything had a three-dimensionality about it. Once we learned words, we flattened everything. I want that coffee cup. But the coffee cup, has pictures on it or has a handle on it. It has, three dimensions about it. So as you can tell from the principles of design, even though she's only checking off two, three, four, five boxes based on the drawing itself, it's brilliant. But the fact that I'm able to draw from this an understanding that I've forgotten about, that is brilliant, right? To be able to implement into my own artwork that gives me that aha moment. Like, yeah, we as human beings, we collect 90% of our information through our eyesight. But what about the imagination and creativity? What about the touch, the smell? What about, looking at things from a different point of view? That is going to open up the dynamics of how we, again, digest information and apply that information.
Yeah, and I mean, what a skill set to grow up having. Because
And
even
this is
when I saw that elephant, like I saw the water going in and out, like
Yeah, and
nose.
this is the example of that, right? So I did this portrait of Mr. Rogers, and you can tell, I brought in his, his heart, his skeletal part of him. So I had this epiphany to be able to say, wow, this little girl taught me something, right? And
Mhm.
again, it goes back to what I said earlier that, this little girl doesn't have a PhD, but can I learn something from my own child who's a pre-kinder or kinder, right? We can.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this is a good example of that. But again, when we talk about better or why is the drawing in the bottom better uh, than the one in the top, and I use that word specifically because a lot of teachers use that word, right? I would say more successful. If I were to ask this question, and I have many occasions, which one of these images do you think is better or successful? It doesn't matter which word you use. The majority, if not the majority of people would say the one on the top is much more
Mhm.
successful or better, simply because it's realistic. But in reality, I would say, and I would argue the fact that one at the bottom is much more successful or better, simply because I've never seen anything like this. The one
Mhm.
at the top, I've seen a million of those. And so the idea that realism can be reached by enough training, but I can't train you how to show you how to draw like this child. It's there, and if it's spoiled and if it's eroded, it's gone. So
Yes.
along with it, the creativity, the curiosity, and also the individuality is gone.
And that ability, like I hear you, and it really connects back to this crusader piece with me of being able to look deeper, right?
Yes,
And
yes,
fostering that skill set of not seeing, for lack of a better kind of analogy, but judging a book by its cover, right? That those kids are not just presenting the cover, whereas that
yes.
realism is just the cover.
Yeah, there's a storyline that goes behind that, that drawing, right? And also, before I forget, as parents, as educators, one of the things that I highly would recommend is the fact that we're living in a time where everybody wants to save everything because we can, right? Now we can buy a terabyte of, back of, in a USB drive or whatever it may be, for peanuts now. And one of the things that you can do to help that resiliency is to make sure that we provide our students, our kids with opportunities where they gain that confidence. And one of the things that you can do as a parent, as a teacher, is to just buy some cheap colored chalk. Go out to the playground or go into the sidewalk next to your house and have them draw it, erase it, draw it, and erase it. And you can do that with an erase board. Because to
Mhm.
be able to do that and to build that confidence that you don't have to save this because you can always do it and improve it even better, is
Mhm.
part of that process of building that resilience in that child or that person.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's very important. So we do things, like I said earlier, in order to have success. With the stripping away of our creativity and individuality, we learn to doubt our success. And I think that's what happens with a lot of people. And I see that a lot. So how do we build resilience, mindfulness in our students, or being present? Because that's one of the things that's lacking. And again, part of the thing that we need to address and be very honest with ourselves is, are we addicted to being entertained and distracted?
Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons why my wife and I talked about not too long ago about the fact that we need to get back to reading more, because we're not reading enough anymore, right? And so the other thing is, again, I just want to reiterate the fact that maybe you should plaster this all over your house, your computer, is that the fear can definitely be controlled by understanding that everything said, everything done can always be improved.
Mhm.
Everything can be improved, and everything should be improved. It should. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be corrected, even in the 21st century. So this is a good place to start. When I was in art school, I was expected to do 6 or 8, 12 different sketches for the next project. And if you multiply this by 5 classes, you can see how much work, we had to do. And I just thought that the teachers were trying to kind of make us get to a point where we were kind of disillusioned and we were going to quit, right? That's what I thought. But over the years, in retrospect, I've come to understand that what they were trying to do really was to make sure that we became resilient,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to kind of say, okay, the average person is only going to do 1 or 2 sketches or 1 or 2 ideas or solutions to those problems. Now, is that going to give me the job in the future, or is that going to give me the success that I want?
Mm-hmm.
But if you challenge yourself and you make this a habit of doing 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 sketches over and over and over again, it's going to become a habit. And why is that important? Well, because how do we know that the solution in the eighth solution or the 10th solution isn't going to be better than the first or the second solution? Well, we don't. That's why we do what? We do it, right? And so when we get ourselves into that mindset of just making sure that we do the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, not only is that going to give you a better chance of a better job or that position, but it's also going to be able to kind of enhance how you apply information and how you think, and also your resiliency. Because if you have 6 or 8 things to choose from, versus 1 or 2, then I would say you have a better chance of finding something that really excites you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pushes you forward. So this would be a good example of that, creating these little thumbnails, sketches. And so I think that that would also be something that as teachers, we would want to do, because my wife tells me consistently that a lot of her students don't even want to do one.
Yeah, and I think as a adult, I mean, even as an adult, as a entrepreneur, which I currently am, nothing is linear, right? And we grow up thinking that everything is linear, and having these practices where we can try the same thing and see that maybe it's not a grade specific improvement, but it's just another way of producing that, or another way of thinking about it. Or, I mean, that in itself is a resilient skill set.
Yeah, because what I find quite common in working with even parents, professionals, students, is that I find that even though we work on these projects that are not even art projects, they look like art projects, but I'll show you that these projects are using art as the foundation to learn, right? To be
Mhm.
more creative, to be more resilient, to be more mindful, to be present. What I find is that on average, once we go through the process of me giving them all of this information and they listen to this stuff, they think that the resolvement is going to happen miraculously, through one project or maybe even 2, and that's not how things work. The more damage we have, the more work we're going to have to do.
Mhm.
And resiliency may, part of that magic number is just the fact that we just need to work harder and to do more to combat that. It's kind of like, if you've gained 50 pounds, one time at the gym is not going to be enough, right? You're going to probably have to go to the gym more times than if you gain 5 pounds or 10 pounds, right? So in some cases, it's just going to be a matter of more work. And what happens with a lot of people is that they do the self-portrait, they do the still life, and at the end of it, they look at their what they've done, and it doesn't fit what they had in their brain. And so what they do is they mock themselves by laughing at what they've created, and then they take it, they crumble it, they throw it in the trash. Now, that in itself is very scary and disappointing. But what's more disappointing to me is the fact that not only are they throwing what they produced that can always be improved and made better, but along with it, they're throwing all of the instruction. And part of the problem with our education system is that we place too much value on the end product, which may or may not be the most successful piece.
Yeah.
I would argue that it's not as good as it can be. And that's why we go back to the beginning and we improve it and we improve it and we improve it, because the process to me is more important than the finality of the thing.
Mhm.
So everything can be improved. And
Mhm.
unless we actually adopt that, then that's also going to be part of what's lacking in building up our resilience. Okay.
Mhm.
So here are the benefits of the arts. Unfortunately, most people try to sell the arts as giving our children an opportunity to express themselves. I think that's, in the times that we're living in, everything is being sold to us by creating doubt and fear. You're getting old, you got crow's feet, you're getting fatter. Um, Everything is sold to us by creating doubt and fear.
Hmm.
And I would rather say, let's promote the arts not by creating doubt and fear, but by logically helping people look at that it's more than just a crafty thing, that it's something that will definitely enhance and further the human potential. And as you can see here with the benefits of the arts, and this is only one of the partial list of learning how to see problem solving skills, communication skills. And I can tell you that I'm not the same person that I was even 6 weeks ago, based on what I consume, whether I read or hear or I try things or even eat stuff, right? Our curiosity, our critical thinking, our introspective, our self-esteem, our self-knowledge, our hidden abilities, our improvisational skills, 21st century skills, learning that mistakes are great, and making us less scared of the unknown. I love the idea of pioneering, right? Where do we go from here in the 21st century? And I think that what we need to do is we need to pioneer. Two of the words that I love is the word the uncertainty of things. People are scared of the word uncertain or the word that manipulation. Those words are only bad depending on what the end result is, right?
Mm.
Teachers manipulate us, parents manipulate us, religious people can manipulate us. But what is the end goal here? Is it a negative or is it a plus? The uncertainty, or I think about this in terms of where we need to go in terms of the pioneers, with the covered wagons,
Hmm.
westward ho kind of thing. Um, you know, any tragedy could have happened to them, but they still moved forward and they pioneered with uncertainty because they were gonna encounter the newness of lands unknown, right? Experiences not encountered yet. And so I think that those two things we need to keep in mind, of the manipulation, but also the pioneering aspect of it, because we're not doing enough of that for sure. Now, as far as our projects, I just want to go through these real quick, unless you want to comment something, Dana.
Yeah, I guess the only piece I was going to ask you was if you had the art programs that you envisioned in school when you were young, how would that have made things different for you?
Well, I think that first of all, I think everything is connected. I look at education and I look at art. I look at, all the core subjects. Everything is connected. I'm interested in, physics, but I don't want to be, a teacher for that, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's one of the things that we still are doing in our education system today, is that they say, oh, you can only choose one thing. You can only be an artist. Don't
Mhm.
even, and they put horse blinders on you, right?
Mhm.
We're going to charge you a little extra because you can, minor in this, right? I think that's the wrong way of going about education. I think that multidisciplinary minds, where you can be a great chef at the same time, you can be a great artist, you can be mathematician. If we look at all of the people that have won the Nobel Prizes in science, Einstein, he played the violin.
Mhm.
So to me, the arts are connected. And I don't know the exact science, but I'm sure that you can find these studies that show the improvement, right? But I think to me, it's almost like defragging the mind and kind of building it back up, kind of, like the muscles, right? Making it strong.
Mhm.
So I think that number one, I would actually ask, if not require, because force is a little too forceful. But I think that all teachers should and parents should be required to stand in front of their kids and say, let me tell you why you're going to school. It's not about memorization. It's not about test taking. It's not about whether or not you're the teacher's pet. It's about holding on to the magic and the fact that we need to enhance the amazing aspects of who you are as an individual, that you're creative, that you're intelligent, and more importantly, that you are who you are, and there's nobody else in the world like you. And
Mhm.
education that you're going to be receiving should enhance that tenfold. So
And
I think that should be a requirement for every teacher around the world to make sure that they stand up in front of the classroom year after year after year and remind our kids who they are and why education is important. That it's not about the test taking, that it's not about the memorization. That's boring. If that's education, I don't want it, right?
Mhm.
I still want the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck to stand up when I say, wow, this is beautiful, man. This is amazing,
Mhm.
right? So, plus also, again, going back to the fact that we need to understand that nothing is perfect. Nothing is perfect. We romanticize the idea of perfection, right? I mean, if you look at Michelangelo's David, right, it may seem perfect, but I'm sure that if you talk to Michelangelo, he would give you an insightful whisper about, oh, I messed up here. I could have improved on that, right?
Mhm.
We look for perfection, but nothing is perfect. Everything can be improved, and we need to also kind of grasp that. So, in terms of doing a self-portrait, one of the things that I do is, and the point of this whole thing is to make sure that we learn how to see, but also the arts can tell us the truth about ourselves and about other things, about other people. When people use the word black for a black person, or in this case, black for this child, we artistically understand that if we logically look at this child is not black
Mhm.
in the same way that this person is not brown, in the
Mhm.
same way that this person is not white, right?
Mhm.
By the way, this is Rocco. And so when we look at, for example, this Anglo-Saxon individual, one of my all-time favorite artists, Paul Cézanne, you can see that this is more true to life than you actually know, because
Mhm.
there's no white in this white Anglo-Saxon person, right?
Mhm.
We could resolve the problem of this kind of nonsense that, there's black people, brown people, white people, by simply accepting the fact that in truth, we're all a multiplicity of different colors. That
Mhm.
is the truth. Now, if you're willing to accept that, we have the opportunity to move forward. If you're not willing to accept that, then you're denying the truth in your mind,
Mhm.
because this is the truth. I'm not making this up. I didn't create this image, right? This is Paul
Mhm.
Cézanne's work. Now, I did these, but the colors in our face are going to be dictated by so many different things, even what we wear. If
Mhm.
I were to put my computer under my double chin, you're going to see a reflection of orange, right? So, color of the skin is going to be dictated by so many different variables. Thickness of skin, the lighting, warm, cool light bulbs, whether it's sun or whether it's indoor lighting. There's so many different things that are going to affect that. So the truth is that art can definitely provide us with truth of things. The
Mhm.
way that I do these self-portraits is that I deconstruct things, because when people are doubting themselves, the worst thing that you can do is to make things worse for them. So I know that by being able to remind participants, students, to be able to say, hey, you have this beautiful thing called your brain in between your ears, and use it. Remind yourself, right? But we're going to cut it up into bit-sized pieces that you can process and not be so frightened. So in this case, by using a mirror or taking a photograph in a phone, and starting off with only the nose, it'll be a lot easier for people to kind of construct a self-portrait and do it in
Mhm.
a way that actually ends up quite interesting. After doing the nose, and being able to kind of understand the structure of it, which is basically four parts: the bulbous center, the two winglets, and the bridge. That's all it is. And so
Mhm.
talk about it logically and to talk about it in a way that is doable by anybody. I think that's where we need to go with this. And you're going to end up putting a post-it over that, and only, again, focusing on the mouth,
Mhm.
the thickness of the upper lip compared to the bottom lip. What happens to the side of your mouth? My wife says it looks like I'm always smiling, even though I'm not. Um,
I
and
get the part of
and the
that.
fact that the lips are not all red, that there could be some purple, some blue, some brown, some orange, some pink, right?
Mhm.
So once we begin to understand the dynamics of all this stuff and the truth about it, the other thing is that I recommend that, first of all, that people wash their hands, and they can take the three fingers or two fingers or the whole palm of their hand and basically, again, touch. the surface of what you're, even the temperature, right? The structure of the eye being in the socket, what the eyebrow feels like before you're drawing it. Why does the eyebrow look and have that shape? Well, if you look at the direction of the hairs, you're going to see how that whole thing is formulated, right? The
Mhm.
structure of that. Even looking closely at your eyes, I used to think that my eyes were brown, and then I took a close look. I realized that my eyes are actually brown, yellow ochre, and a little bit of green.
Yeah, and I mean, another way of defining all of this is mindfulness, right? Like you're
Yes,
being
being
mindful
present, being
strategy.
present. Yeah, being
Exactly.
present. And then, once you put all this stuff together, you kind of spread them out and you look at, whether or not you need to invest in plastic surgery. You may not, or maybe you do. And then you basically kind of put the structure of the face, the chin, the hair, and eventually you end up with this beautiful self-portrait. But again, why am I including these that parents or students have done? Because they're works of art. Aside from this learning process, you end up with this derivative, which is a beautiful piece of artwork that is really unique because it's not about realism. Realism is boring.
Mhm.
It's kind of like going to McDonald's and having a, burger that's going to taste the same in every state and every country, right? To a certain degree. But if you go to a gourmet burger, right, that I've eaten now that I can afford it, those gourmet burgers, they're all different, and you have this complexity of flavors that linger throughout the consumption of this burger. And when you look at these portraits, either you're going to eat it like a McDonald's burger, which is realistic and boring as hell, or you're going to eat it as a gourmet burger where you kind of savor all of these remnants of different flavors and taste, that keep you occupied and kind of thinking, oh my God, this is really, really good, right?
Yeah, and to me, from this mental health perspective, it's so important because it's doing exactly what we talked about, but practicing making a vulnerable way of sharing information or doing something against the grain or not just falling into the mode of sheep and just going along the path that we think that we're supposed to, and that's what makes resilience adults, because you have practice, or if you are
Exactly.
an adult doing this practice, it can be transferable to your everyday life.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at, for example, the one on the right with the blue, I just think that's so brilliant. I mean, it's just so different.
Mhm.
And I could take, these pieces to a museum if done maybe with in a different context. People would be accepting of this stuff as being brilliant artistically, right? And I think that being able to do these, because these are basically parents and students and professionals that did these, the fact that they're able to do something and being accepted as being valid and beautiful and genius, that is also going to give you the confidence which transfers over to the resilience part of it. Right?
Mhm.
I can do this, right?
Yeah, have the skill.
Um, and I think a lot of times we also need to look at simplicity, right? Because again, we think that realism is much more effective and much more valuable, but simplicity can sometimes be so, so beautiful. My wife and I talk about how we've had these beautiful, amazing um, dishes that we've eaten at different, places, different restaurants that, and sometimes, the simplicity of a beautiful taco done simply is amazing. It's comforting. In the same case with this student, high school student, we did a family portrait. This is so simple, but yet so complex. And so we don't really have to overthink things. I think simplicity sometimes is so beautiful. It's so comforting,
Mhm.
so genius, which I think is amazing, right? The other thing is we can also do a still life. And in this case, again, we can throw in science,
Mhm.
we can throw in culture, we can throw in all of these different aspects, truth. But in this case, understanding how light works, that a green leaf is not really green. It's actually reflecting all colors except green.
Mhm.
It's reflecting green. It's not absorbing green. So being able to kind of, again, do the different sketches, making sure that if we're drawing, for example, a peach or a lemon or an orange, that again, that we pick it up, that we scratch it, that we smell it, that we close our eyes and we feel the texture, that we look at all the different angles, because
Mhm.
one angle might be much more interesting than another. So being able to do that and gain access to all of this information is super important because the person that has more information available is going to have options. And when
Mhm.
you have options, if you only have one or two options to create something, then it's going to be really, really difficult. People can do that, but you have to practice that. But if you have all of these different options to choose from, the color, the texture, the smell, the angle, then you're going to be able to produce something that is going to be fantastic and original and different. So
Mhm.
the more information, and we use our senses as human beings, because let's again, I need to remind you guys that most people only use their eyesight. That's it. And so to be able to kind of use again all of your senses to be able to kind of do things bigger and smaller. There's some papayas, my wife and I are eating papayas. There are papayas that are like, a foot and a half long or 2 feet long, right?
Mhm.
So, when we look at things, for example, in real life, I love people watching at airports or at malls or whatever. This idea of proportions is not really true. I think that I've seen people that have no necks or very little of a neck, and I find that to be really fascinating. Or their
Yeah.
stomach is almost as big as the rest of their body. All of this stuff is really interesting to draw because you can draw something and it can still be realistic in terms of the content of it.
Mhm.
But people are fixated in the rules and regulations, which are important, don't get me wrong. But I think that real life is kind of strange.
Yeah, there's so
Yeah.
many nuances. And I
In
think,
terms of the fruit, I mean, look at this avocado and this mango, right? I mean, the fact that, again, if we look at, for example, the oranges that Van Gogh did, you would assume that all oranges are orange, and that's not true.
Mhm.
Oranges have, yellow, they have red, they may have even purple, they may have a little bit of green, depending on their ripe stage.
Mhm.
So knowing this is going to give you options to be able to create something that is totally different than everybody else because we don't want the same thing over and over and over again. Yeah,
Yeah. And exercising this part of your brain, I mean, that's defines success beyond art.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So again, these are my two websites, the simonspeaker.com and simonsilva.com. So one of them is the speaker, the other one is the art website.
Mhm.
And again, the books that I would recommend are these two books. I think there's four stories of four women that are incredibly resilient in terms of what they were able to do. Basically, very little to no education, formal education for that matter. And then the Cultivate a Creative Mind definitely will give you a lot of great ideas as well.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today and really showing us how, I mean, art is so much more than art alone. Like
It's
there is such a need for it. There's such a need for us to be able to look and engage and see with more than just our eyes, everything deeper, and to have these experiences of creating something not with one specific outcome in mind, but practicing just improving upon something and remaining curious. And
Mhm.
this all ties so closely with, or ties in so nicely with resilience. And yeah, I really appreciate getting to speak with you today. And I highly recommend everyone check out your website and all of your art that you have to offer. And yeah, I'm so grateful for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.